Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're looking into Claus von Stauffenberg.
Definitely a fascinating figure.
Absolutely. And I think for our listeners, especially those who share Stauffenberg's Catholic faith, the big question is,
how could he, as a devout Catholic, bring himself to try and kill Hitler?
right, that's a tough one, a real moral dilemma.
It is. To understand his actions, we need to start with who he was, where he came from, his background.
Okay, so let's rewind. Early life, what was that like?
So imagine this, Claus von Stauffenberg. He's born into this old, noble German family.
Nobility, huh?
Exactly. Tradition, duty, and this strong Catholic identity.
Not just like going to church on Sunday.
No, this was deeply ingrained in their whole way of life.
Got it. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
But then, he initially supported Hitler. Hard to square that with resisting tyranny.
You have to remember what was happening then. Germany was in a rough spot.
After World War I, right?
Yeah, the economy was in shambles, and there was this feeling of, national humiliation.
So Hitler comes along, promises to make Germany great again.
Exactly. And that appealed to a lot of people, Stauffenberg included.
So he kind of bought into the propaganda.
To some degree, yeah. At first, he saw Hitler as someone who could unify Germany, bring back order and strength.
Okay, but there's also this thing about the, what was it called? The Führer principle.
The Führer principle, yeah.
What's that all about?
Basically, it's the idea that you need a single, strong leader with absolute authority.
Oh.
And, for Stauffenberg, coming from this hierarchical, aristocratic family,
Right.
it maybe didn't seem so strange.
I see. The Führer principle kind of fit in with how he was raised.
Mm-hmm.
But then something changed, right?
Oh, absolutely. As the Nazis gained more power, the real horror of their ideology became impossible to ignore.
The persecution of the Jews, all the violence?
Exactly. And the suppression of any opposition, attacks on the church itself.
That must have hit hard, given his faith.
It did. All of this clashed violently with Stauffenberg's beliefs. So how does he reconcile being a devout Catholic?
With the realization that the leader he initially supported was a tyrant? That's a real head-scratcher.
It's the core of his dilemma, this question that resonates even today.
Yeah.
What do you do when your conscience and the government,
Or even your church, don't line up?
exactly. In Stauffenberg, we see this really fascinating evolution.
Walk me through that. How does he go from supporting Hitler to actively plotting against him?
It was a process, and I think the George Kreis played a big role.
Okay, wait, what's the George Kreis?
So it was this intellectual and cultural group led by the poet Stefan George,
No.
very patriotic, had this romanticized view of German culture and history.
But not overtly political.
Not directly, no, but they did emphasize strong leadership, cultural renewal, which may have initially drawn Stauffenberg toward the Nazis.
So he saw some common ground there.
Perhaps at first. But the George Kreis were also very wary of the Nazis' brutality, their crudeness. Remember, this group valued art, philosophy, higher ideals.
So as the Nazis become more violent, more totalitarian.
Stauffenberg's ties to the George Kreis probably made his disillusionment even stronger.
So we have his Catholic faith pulling him one way,
Right.
this intellectual circle nudging him in another.
And in the middle of it all, Hitler turning into a monster.
What a mess.
Yeah, and we see this inner struggle playing out in his actions. As he witnessed the Nazi regime's atrocities, his conscience couldn't stay quiet.
Okay, let's talk about his military career. How'd that shape his views, his experiences as a soldier?
His time in the military, especially on the Eastern Front, really exposed him to the brutality of the Nazi regime firsthand. The things he saw there.
Oh, it must have been awful.
It was. The mistreatment of civilians, the systematic extermination of the Jews.
It's one thing to hear about it, another to see it.
Absolutely. This was a direct violation of everything he believed in as a Catholic, as a human being.
He must have been shaken to his core.
You can see how he goes from being, somewhat enthusiastic about the war to someone battling these huge moral doubts. And then, of course, he was injured in North Africa.
Right, pretty badly.
Lost an eye, a hand, several fingers. It was devastating.
Forced him to face his own mortality, too.
Definitely. And it gave him this very personal perspective on the human cost of the war.
So he's struggling with the horrors of the Nazis, the violence, his own suffering. That's a major turning point, right?
Huge turning point.
Yeah.
And it's in this crucible of pain, of disillusionment, that his decision to join the resistance starts to take shape. He realizes something has to change, even if it means risking everything.
And for a devout Catholic, that decision couldn't have been easy. The church, has a complicated stance on Violence, killing, even in self-defense.
Absolutely. For Stauffenberg to be part of a plot to kill Hitler, that was a moral minefield. We'll dive deeper into that when we continue.
Sounds good. We'll pick up right there after a quick break. So before the break, we were talking about Stauffenberg's growing disillusionment and his incredibly difficult decision to join the resistance. How did he go from just being like a disillusioned officer to actually being part of this plot to kill Hitler?
Well, his transfer to the replacement army in Berlin was key, I think.
Okay.
It put him in direct contact with other high-ranking officers, people who were also deeply troubled by what was happening.
So he wasn't alone. I mean, it would be hard to act on his own, right?
Exactly. The resistance, especially within the military, it was small but growing.
Right.
And they saw Hitler as this threat, not just to Germany's future, but to the very soul of the nation,
Yeah.
And they came to believe that the only way to stop him was to kill him.
That's a heavy decision, especially for Stauffenberg. As a devout Catholic, I mean, we were talking about it before the break, the church and assassination, it's complicated. How did he reconcile his faith with this plot?
Yeah, that's a question that's fascinated historians and theologians for decades. And there's no easy answer. We don't have, personal writings from him that directly address this moral struggle.
Right.
But we can look at the context, his time, the broader debates in the church to try and understand his thinking.
Okay, give me some context. What were the prevailing Catholic views on tyrannicide, the killing of a tyrant, back then?
Well, by the 20th century, the church had moved away from that medieval idea that you could just, justify killing a tyrant under certain conditions.
Right.
The focus was more on obedience to authority, even unjust authority,
Okay.
and finding peaceful ways to resist.
So how could Stauffenberg, a man who clearly took his faith seriously, be part of a plan that went against this?
It's the million-dollar question. Some historians think he might have drawn on older, more nuanced theological arguments.
Oh, interesting.
Arguments that allowed for tyrannicide in extreme cases. When the tyrant poses a serious threat to the common good.
So, in Stauffenberg's mind, Hitler would have been that kind of threat.
It's possible, yeah. He'd seen the horrors of the Nazi regime, the mass murder, the destruction. He might have believed that getting rid of Hitler was the only way to stop the bloodshed and save Germany.
But wouldn't that still be a conflict with his beliefs? I mean, even in extreme situations, taking a life is a huge deal.
Absolutely. And that's where it gets really complex. Remember, he wasn't operating in a vacuum. He was living in a time of unimaginable evil, facing choices most of us can't even fathom.
Yeah.
His decision to join the plot must have been agonizing, a process of intense discernment, weighing his duty to God, his conscience, his country.
So it's not black and white, right?
No. There were so many shades of gray moral ambiguities that he had to grapple with.
That's what makes this so fascinating. But okay, let's get back to the plot itself. How was the assassination supposed to work?
Well, Stauffenberg was in a unique position to actually carry it out.
Okay.
His role in the replacement army gave him access to high-level meetings with Hitler.
Oh, I see.
He planned to plant a bomb at one of these meetings and then get back to Berlin to coordinate the coup.
And the coup was meant to, overthrow the whole Nazi government.
That's right. The conspirators, they had this plan, Operation Valkyrie. They'd seize control of government buildings, communication networks, once Hitler was dead. The goal was a new government, negotiating peace with the Allies.
Wow, that's a bold plan. Seems almost, too good to be true.
It was incredibly ambitious. It relied on so many things going right. The bomb had to kill Hitler, the military had to follow their orders, and they had to act fast before the Nazi leadership could regroup.
Okay, so tell me what happened on that day.
So, July 20th, 1944, Stauffenberg flies to the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia.
Yeah?
He's got a briefcase with 2 bombs. He's supposed to plant both, but things don't go as planned.
What happened? Something went wrong.
The meeting, it got moved to a different location, a small wooden building instead of this concrete bunker. This change, and a guard rushing Stauffenberg, meant he only had time to prime one of the bombs.
Oh, no. So he went in with just 1 bomb. That's a huge risk.
It was. But he was committed. He put the briefcase under the table, close as he could get it to Hitler, then excused himself to make a phone call.
And then, boom.
Yes, the bomb exploded. But it seems fate had other plans.
Wait, what do you mean? Did Hitler survive?
He did. Someone had moved the briefcase slightly, put it behind this heavy table leg.
Oh, wow.
And that shielded Hitler from the full force of the blast.
What a close call. So what about Stauffenberg? What happened to him?
He saw the explosion from a distance, and believing Hitler was dead, he left the Wolf's Lair with his aide and flew back to Berlin.
So he thought he'd succeeded.
He did. And when he got back, he urged his co-conspirators to activate Operation Valkyrie. The coup was set in motion, orders went out to military units, and for a moment, it looked like the plan might work.
But it didn't.
No. As news of Hitler's survival spread, things fell apart.
Oh, no.
There was confusion, hesitation, conflicting orders, chaos, really. A lot of officers didn't know what was going on, who to follow. They just refused to act.
What about Stauffenberg? What was he doing during all this?
He was desperately trying to hold it all together, giving orders, making phone calls, trying to rally support. But it was a losing battle.
So the plot failed.
It did. Within hours, it was clear. The attempt to overthrow Hitler had been crushed.
No.
When the conspirators, including Stauffenberg, they were arrested,
Then,
faced swift and brutal punishment.
after all that planning, all that risk, it all came down to a misplaced briefcase.
It's a tragic irony, you know. But even in failure, Stauffenberg's story, it gives us these profound insights into faith, courage, the moral dilemmas we face when good and evil clash in such unexpected ways.
We're back, and wow, knowing how the July 20th plot ends makes it even more, I don't know, intense to think about what Stauffenberg must have been feeling. Like, he knew it was going to fail, so what was going through his head as he's putting this plan into action?
You really see his conviction, you know?
Yeah.
Despite everything, all the risks, the setbacks, he never wavered. He believed this was the right thing to do, even if it meant his own life.
That's incredible, especially with the whole moral question of being a Catholic, right? We talked about the church's view on killing a tyrant. Did he think he was sinning by doing this?
We can't know for sure, right, what was in his heart, but you can tell he wrestled with it, the morality of his actions. Some historians think he might have talked to priests he trusted or, you know, looked for theological arguments that justified resisting tyranny in extreme situations.
Yeah, makes sense. He wasn't someone to just toss his faith aside for politics.
Yeah.
But still, taking a life, even a dictator's, that's a huge weight for a devout Catholic.
No question. It's likely he saw it as, like, a tragic necessity, a choice between two evils.
Right.
On one hand, Hitler continues his reign of terror, potentially millions more die. On the other, he takes this drastic step to stop him, knowing it goes against his core beliefs.
Awful dilemma.
Yeah.
How do you think his faith played into his decision in that moment?
It's interesting to think about. His upbringing, it gave him this strong sense of duty, of fighting for what's right, no matter how hard. And those values, they're at the core of his faith, his military service. It's like he was in a battle for Germany's soul, you know, a battle he had to fight.
Sounds like he truly believed God was with him, that this was like divine inspiration.
Maybe. There are stories of him praying before the assassination, seeking guidance. It seems like he felt he was answering a higher calling, even if it meant going against what the church taught.
And in the end, he paid the ultimate price. What happened after the plot failed?
The Nazis, they acted fast.
Yeah.
Stauffenberg and the others, they were arrested, executed almost immediately.
Wow.
A sham trial, then shot by firing squad in the courtyard of the Benler block, the replacement army headquarters.
Brutal.
Yes.
But even in those last moments, his faith seemed to be there. There's that quote, right?
Oh, yes. Facing the firing squad, he reportedly shouted, "Es lebe das heilige Deutschland."
Long live sacred Germany.
Powerful, isn't it? A testament to his love for his country, his belief in a better future. Some think it was also a nod to Stefan George and the George Kreis, that vision of a spiritually renewed Germany.
Wow. Defiant, even facing death, holding on to his ideals.
Absolutely. His story makes us think, you know, about how far obedience should go, what real courage is, what we're responsible for when evil is right in front of us.
It's a powerful reminder that faith, it's not just about rules or blindly obeying. It's about wrestling with tough questions, making hard choices, even if there's a cost.
Couldn't agree more. Stauffenberg's legacy, it's complex. Some call him a hero, others a traitor. But there's no doubt he was a man of conviction, driven by duty, a belief in something bigger than himself.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Claus von Stauffenberg, what's the takeaway? What do you want our listeners to think about?
I think it's crucial to remember that Stauffenberg wasn't a saint, not some superhero. He was human, you know, flawed, trying to deal with an impossible situation. His story doesn't give us easy answers, but it does make us reflect on faith, obedience, the courage it takes to stand up for what's right, even when it means going against everyone else.
A powerful message. One that really hits home for those of us trying to live out our faith in a world that's so complicated and often, you know, just plain hard. Thanks for joining us on this journey, exploring one of history's most fascinating moral dilemmas. We hope you'll keep learning about Claus von Stauffenberg, his life, his legacy, and the questions he raises about faith, courage, and the fight for justice.